Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Hope Logan had always believed that the day she finally walked down the aisle to remarry Liam Spencer would be a day defined by peace, closure, and a kind of soft, cleansing joy that washed away every heartbreak the two of them had inflicted on each other over the years, but instead the morning of the wedding dawned with an eerie, uncanny stillness that felt like Los Angeles itself was holding its breath, as though the city sensed the truth that no one else wanted to speak aloud, namely that nothing involving the Logans, the Forresters, the Spencers, and especially the complicated, endlessly wounded heart of Thomas Forrester ever went according to plan, and that weddings in this family were never just ceremonies, but battlegrounds where love, obsession, secrets, and generational sins collided with explosive consequences. And from the moment Hope stepped into the bridal suite at the Forrester mansion, still in her robe, clutching the bodice of her gown with trembling fingers, she felt a shiver crawl up her spine as if someone had walked over her grave, unaware that miles away on a darkened road, Thomas Forrester, unshaven, exhausted, wild-eyed, was speeding back toward Los Angeles with a desperation so consuming it eclipsed everything except the single thought echoing through his mind in jagged, panicked bursts: "You can't marry him, Hope. You can't say I do, not when you're still mine, not when you love me and you're too afraid to admit it." It had been months since Thomas vanished abruptly from the Forrester radar, disappearing after the heartbreak of once again losing Hope, a vanishing act that Ridge and Steffy tried to rationalize as a needed break, a reset, a chance for Thomas to heal somewhere far away from the city where his greatest love and greatest shame were forever intertwined, but no one knew that his disappearance had spiraled into something darker. Weeks spent drifting from place to place, obsessively sketching Hope's face in notebooks filled to bursting, replaying every moment of their almost life together, tormenting himself with the memories of her soft voice telling him she wasn't ready, that she wasn't in love with him the way he was with her, and the final knife twist, watching her return again and again to Liam Spencer, the man who had hurt her, betrayed her, doubted her, left her, returned to her, and repeated the cycle until Hope herself had forgotten what her heart once longed for. And as Thomas pushed harder on the gas pedal, the Forrester Creations building came into view, glinting in the afternoon light like a beacon pulling him toward the only place that still felt like home, even though he had not set foot there in months. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations were well underway at the Forrester estate, with the decorators fluffing the roses, the Spencer security team ensuring the grounds were free from unexpected press, and Brooke Logan pacing with that familiar mix of maternal anxiety and Logan confidence as she checked and rechecked every detail, wanting this reunion marriage for her daughter to be perfect, convinced that Liam was the safe choice, the right choice, the moral choice, though even she could not forget the number of times Liam had broken Hope's heart with indecision, waffling, and emotional turbulence, and when Donna arrived carrying Beth in her little flower girl dress, the child squealed with joy, racing into Hope's arms and proclaiming in her tiny, breathless voice that she couldn't wait for Mommy and Daddy to be married forever and ever this time, a phrase that made Hope smile with aching tenderness even as her stomach tightened with an anxiety she could not dismiss because the truth was that last night when she looked in the mirror, veil pinned loosely in her hair, she saw a woman trying desperately to convince herself that she was choosing stability instead of passion, certainty instead of longing, but deep in the quiet corners of her spirit, she still heard Thomas's voice, still felt the ghost of his hands guiding hers at the design table, still felt the fire of all the stolen moments they had shared in times when she let herself forget the rules and the expectations and simply leaned into the raw, terrifying pull they had toward each other. At that moment, Steffy Forrester stood on her balcony, observing the arrival of wedding guests with a disquiet she attempted to dispel. Finn's reassuring embrace encircled her waist as he assured her that everything would be fine. However, Steffy remained unconvinced, as her instincts, those same instincts that had preserved her life numerous times, were vehemently signaling that the day would not proceed smoothly, that something was imminent, something long repressed and all too familiar. When she glanced toward the road, her breath momentarily caught, as if she sensed her brother's approach through an instinctive sibling bond forged by trauma and shared childhood shadows, yet she dismissed it as mere nerves. On the highway, Thomas maneuvered around a sluggish vehicle, narrowly avoiding the median, his heart racing as he recalled the moment he received a text from Douglas, a message deceptively simple yet profoundly impactful, abruptly pulling Thomas from the emotional isolation he had imposed on himself. "Mom and Dad are getting married tomorrow. I wish you could be here." That message fractured something within Thomas, dismantling the barrier of restraint he had constructed. In the ensuing agonizing hours, the truth he had suppressed surged forth. He could not permit the wedding to proceed, especially when he was convinced that Hope was marrying Liam out of guilt, fear, and a misguided effort to establish stability for Beth and Douglas. Upon finally arriving at the Forrester mansion gates, parking haphazardly with the keys left in the ignition and his chest heaving, he moved with an almost frenzied determination, slipping through the side entrance often overlooked by security. His footsteps reverberated softly down the back hallway, initiating a series of events that would be indelibly inscribed in the tumultuous narrative of this family's history. Inside the bridal suite, Hope stepped into her gown, the delicate silk molding to her curves, the bodice shimmering softly with tiny pearls, and as she turned toward the mirror, she expected to see her mother or her bridesmaids behind her, but instead she saw nothing but her own reflection and the truth written plainly in her eyes. She didn't look like a woman joyously marrying the love of her life. She looked like a woman trying to silence a part of herself that refused to die, and as she reached to adjust her veil, a gentle knock on the door made her startle, her heart leaping, and she called out that she wasn't ready yet, but the door creaked open anyway, and when Thomas stepped inside, gaunt, breathless, eyes burning with a mixture of desperation and love, Hope's world tilted sharply, her breath catching, her knees weakening as she whispered his name with a bewildered, trembling softness, and Thomas, who had rehearsed speeches during sleepless nights, who had envisioned confronting her with perfect clarity, found that every prepared word dissolved the second he saw her in that wedding gown, radiant, fragile, heartbreakingly beautiful, and his voice cracked as he rasped, "You can't marry him." Hope, of rage as she demanded his immediate departure, threatening to summon security. Thomas, however, resisted, his voice becoming increasingly agitated and desperate, prompting Finn and Steffy to rush upstairs, their senses overwhelmed as they witnessed the unfolding confrontation. Liam, waiting at the altar, sensed the tension, asking Wyatt what was taking so long, unaware that upstairs Hope was caught in the most painful tug-of-war of her life as Thomas begged her to acknowledge the feelings she had buried, begged her to admit that their connection was real, begged her not to trap herself in another cycle of heartbreak with Liam, and Hope finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks as she confessed that she did love Thomas in ways she never allowed herself to confront. But she didn't know if that love was healthy or safe or right, and she didn't know if she could trust herself with him after everything, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to choose passion over stability. And when Liam finally stormed up the stairs after being alerted by a frantic Carter, he burst into the bridal suite and saw Thomas standing too close to Hope, Hope crying, Brooke yelling, Steffy trying to pull her brother back, and Finn stepping in as peacekeeper, and Liam exploded with anger, demanding Thomas leave, accusing him of manipulation, obsession, and sabotage, and Thomas, who had spent months trying to be a better man, who had tried to bury his desire, finally snapped, shouting that Liam had never deserved Hope, that he had broken her again and again, that he had wavered between two women for years, that Thomas had changed while Liam had not, that Hope deserved someone who saw her as more than a fallback or a comfortable option, and when Liam lunged at Thomas, Finn held him back, Steffy yelled for everyone to stop, and Hope stood there trembling, clutching her gown, realizing that the moment she feared had arrived. She had to choose, truly choose, and it could not be about Douglas or Beth or Brooke or Ridge or expectations or history, it had to be about her. Silence enveloped the room as all gazes fixed upon her. Hope positioned herself between Thomas and Liam, raising her chin, tears shimmering in her eyes, her voice quavering as she confessed her profound affection for Liam, the father of her child, acknowledging their shared history, comfort, and aspirations. However, she also revealed her unsettling feelings for Thomas, which were potent, magnetic, intense, and unpredictable. She recognized that marrying Liam without confronting those emotions would be disingenuous to all, including herself. When Liam softly uttered her name, filled with hurt and desperation, Hope closed her eyes and murmured that she could not marry him that day, that she was unprepared, her heart too conflicted, and that she required clarity, space, and truth. As she removed her veil with trembling hands, gasps erupted from the guests below as news spread that the wedding was cancelled. Liam, his eyes brimming with devastation and betrayal, gazed at her as though the earth had collapsed beneath him, murmuring that she had opted for Thomas. However, Hope maintained that she had prioritized herself, and Thomas, who moments prior had harbored hopes of winning her, experienced the poignant realization that, despite everything, there were no facile triumphs, no victorious declarations of love, only the intricate consequences of years of injuries and repressed longings. Brooke attempted to comfort Hope, but Hope delicately withdrew, informing her mother that she required space to breathe, contemplate, and cease allowing others' expectations to dictate her decisions. As she passed Thomas, she halted momentarily to whisper, "Don't follow me," leaving him immobilized, astonished, and conflicted between relief at her not marrying Liam and grief over her not selecting him either. Downstairs, visitors murmured, gossip spread rapidly, and Ridge comforted a sad Liam as Steffy approached Thomas with a tempest of anger and worry, as Finn attempted to stabilize both of them. Outside, Hope stepped into the rose garden, sunlight catching the tears still slipping down her cheeks, and she inhaled deeply, closing her eyes, finally allowing herself to feel everything she had spent years suppressing: fear, longing, heartbreak, desire, confusion, freedom, and for the first time she realized that maybe the biggest plot twist of the day wasn't Thomas's dramatic return or Liam's shattered hopes, but the possibility that Hope Logan, for the first time in her life, might write her own story instead of letting everyone else write it for her. And as the Forrester estate buzzed with chaos, accusations, apologies, and grief, Hope knew only one thing for certain: nothing about today was over, not the consequences, not the emotions, not the relationships, and certainly not the tangled, electrifying bond between her and Thomas Forrester, who watched her from the balcony with an expression that held equal parts heartbreak and hope, knowing that this wasn't the end of their story. Not by a long shot. The moment Hope Logan stepped into the Forrester rose garden, leaving the echo of gasps, heartbreak, and furious whispers behind her, Los Angeles seemed to shift into a strange new orbit, as though the universe itself had been tilted sideways by her choice not to marry Liam Spencer, and while the sun shone over the sprawling estate, casting shimmering golden light across the petals, the atmosphere trembled with tension so thick it felt like a living force pressing against her skin. Hope leaned against the stone balustrade, her breath uneven, her hands trembling as the enormity of what she had done crashed over her. She had broken Liam's heart again, shattered her daughter's expectations, stunned her mother, risked the wrath of the Spencer patriarchs, and ignited a wildfire of emotions between Thomas Forrester and the entire Forrester and Logan clans. But for the first time in her adult life, she felt an eerie, terrifying, liberating sense of honesty, because she had finally stopped pretending, stopped performing, stopped contorting herself into the perfect woman for everyone else, and as she closed her eyes, she felt the delicate brushing of petals falling from a nearby trellis, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant murmur of the guests trying to process what had just taken place upstairs. And then she heard footsteps approach slowly, cautiously, as if the person feared spooking a wounded animal, and when she opened her eyes, she found Ridge Forrester standing a respectful 10 feet away, his expression a complex blend of concern, confusion, paternal affection, and quiet understanding, because as a man who had seen love take brutal, unexpected shapes throughout his life, he recognized the look in Hope's eyes, the look of a woman at war with herself, torn between two futures and terrified of choosing wrong. And Ridge approached her slowly, telling her softly that whatever she was feeling, she didn't owe anyone perfection, that breaking a wedding was painful but not unforgivable, that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was stop before taking a step that their heart didn't truly support. And while Hope appreciated his gentleness, a sharp wave of guilt rolled through her because she knew Liam was inside, devastated, and that Thomas, the man whose shadow haunted her every thought, was somewhere nearby, spiraling in his own tortured emotions, and she wished for one impossible moment that she could wipe away everyone's pain at once. But inside the mansion, the emotional explosion was far from contained. Liam Spencer stood in the middle of the foyer surrounded by murmuring guests as Wyatt tried to shield him from the onslaught of questions, yet nothing could shield him from the imploding ache inside his chest as he replayed Hope's trembling words, "I can't marry you today," and the sight of Thomas standing behind her like some tragic, starving ghost who had crawled back from the edges of obsession, sending Liam into a rage so deep he nearly charged upstairs again until Finn intervened, reminding Liam that fighting Thomas wouldn't change Hope's choice, and Liam, shaking with grief and disbelief, demanded to know how many times he was supposed to pay for Thomas's existence in their lives, how many times he was expected to forgive Hope for letting Thomas get close, and the guests watched silently with widened eyes as Liam finally broke down, whispering that he had thought this marriage would finally stabilize Beth's life, finally give them the family he had craved since losing control so many times between Steffy and Hope, but now everything was broken again. Meanwhile upstairs, Steffy stormed into the bridal suite where Thomas paced like a restless storm contained in a too-small room, running his hands through his hair, muttering half-formed thoughts, blaming himself, blaming fate, blaming the twisted tethers between the Forresters and the Logans that never allowed clean boundaries, and Steffy shouted for him to stop, demanded he sit down, demanded he breathe, but Thomas snapped that he had spent months doing nothing but breathing, isolating, healing, trying to kill the part of him that loved Hope too much, and it didn't work, nothing worked, because the moment he heard she was marrying Liam, something inside him broke open, something raw and unhealed, and he knew, absolutely knew, that he couldn't let her walk into another marriage built on denial, and Steffy fired back that Thomas didn't get to decide Hope's life, that bursting into the wedding was reckless, hurtful, and dangerous, that he had made everything worse, and her voice cracked because she had hoped, prayed, that her brother had truly changed, but watching him unravel again terrified her, and when Finn joined them, placing a steady hand on Thomas's shoulder, he spoke with quiet medical authority, telling Thomas that emotional spirals like this didn't happen in a vacuum and that whatever he was feeling needed to be addressed before he made more impulsive choices that could damage not just him but Douglas and Hope too. Thomas reacted with indignation to the suggestion, asserting his stability and clarifying that his return was neither to propose nor to abduct Hope, nor to revisit past behaviors. He merely sought the truth to be articulated, which Hope had done. She harbored feelings for him, was not entirely devoted to Liam, and her emotions were conflicted. How could anyone blame him for resisting the suppression of that truth beneath a marriage destined for despair? Steffy, with tears of frustration in her eyes, informed him that even if Hope harbored feelings for him, it did not warrant disrupting her wedding. She asserted that if he genuinely loved Hope, he would grant her the necessary space instead of overwhelming her with expectations and desperation. However, Thomas, fatigued and trembling, murmured that he was uncertain how to give space when every breath he took pained him in her absence. Steffy then embraced him, not in endorsement but in profound sibling sorrow. Downstairs, Brooke Logan confronted Liam with intense maternal conviction, asserting that the day's calamity was not Hope's fault but rather a result of Thomas's manipulation. Liam retorted bitterly, claiming that Brooke consistently shielded her daughter and distorted the narrative to portray him as the villain or the unstable one. However, he insisted that this time he was not delusional. Hope had confessed her feelings for Thomas, despite her attempts to suppress them. Brooke's expression paled as the truth hit her with the force of a slap. She had instinctively sensed that Hope's affections had been perilously drawn to Thomas for some time. Nevertheless, she had desperately clung to the belief that Hope would select the right man, the one she trusted, the one who would not hurt her. Now, Brooke found herself at odds with reality, unable to refute what she had overheard upstairs. In the rose garden, Ridge remained silently next to Hope as she attempted to regulate her breathing, and he ultimately posed the question that others were eager to vocalize: did she love Thomas? The words lingered in the atmosphere like a delicate thread, glimmering with perilous potential, and Hope experienced a surge of panic as she grappled with the inability to respond truthfully without further fracturing her world. She murmured her uncertainty, acknowledging the complexity of her emotions, noting that Thomas perceived her in ways Liam did not, while Liam provided her with a sense of security that Thomas could not. She felt torn between two identities, the woman she was expected to be with Liam and the woman she transformed into when she embraced the creative, exhilarating, and perilous connection she shared with Thomas. Ridge nodded slowly, conveying that love is seldom pure or rational, and that she need not have all her emotions resolved today. However, she must respect her own heart, even if it is chaotic, perplexing, and flawed. He reminded her that his life had been a complex weave of difficult decisions, that perfection is an illusion, that love does not adhere to conventions, and that she should not marry anyone until she is unequivocally certain of her choice. Hope experienced an unforeseen wave of thankfulness towards Ridge, since he, in contrast to Brooke, who urged her towards Liam, and Thomas, who implored her to select him, merely encouraged her to prioritize herself. This clarity, both simple and profound, unleashed a transformative realization within her. As Hope turned back toward the mansion, ready to confront Brooke, Liam, and the impending storm within, the glass doors swung open, revealing Liam on the threshold. His complexion was ashen, his eyes reddened, and his expression was one of profound betrayal and heartbreak. Upon seeing Hope alongside Ridge, something within him fractured, not with violence, but with a sorrowful resignation, a quiet implosion of a man who had endured excessive hope and disappointment. Liam descended the steps slowly and deliberately until he stood before Hope, fixating on her as the guests behind him fell silent. Hope instinctively reached out to him, desiring to elucidate and provide solace, yet Liam recoiled, anguish deeply etched on his visage. He murmured that he could pardon her for numerous transgressions, but he could not absolve her for deceiving herself. He asserted that he could not envisage a future with a woman whose heart was not wholly his, and that, albeit painfully and reluctantly, they had perhaps arrived at the conclusion of their cycle. He suggested that their tumultuous relationship needed to cease, not for his sake, nor for hers, but for Beth, who merited stability and honesty. Those words devastated Hope in unforeseen ways, for Liam had long been the one imploring them to remain together, yet now he was the one withdrawing, and that reversal pierced her emotional haze like a bolt of lightning. Within, the assembly whispered as the complete Forrester and Logan families congregated at the windows, observing the event transpire like powerless onlookers in an inescapable tragedy.